This film contains several difficult topics displayed on screen now.
Free States court of law has arrived for us. If we won't yield our sense of justice, we will continue to take other places and put people in need into. They are now just breaking in.
No more homeless deaths. Take back empty homes. Housing for the people. I saw these words for the first time on the side of a building in the center of Dublin, Ireland. A building that dozens of police officers were marching into while a helicopter circled overhead. These words waved from banners as two men were arrested and taken out to police vans while people walked by on their way to work. Some stopped, some kept walking. If those people logged onto social media later that day, they might have seen the same words posted by a new page called the Revolutionary Housing League. Maybe they stopped then, or maybe they scrolled past. The Revolutionary Workers' Union
have seized long-term vacant property at 12 to 14 Eden Quay to help those in housing need and develop resistance to the housing crisis. Support James Connolly House. Take back empty homes. Open all vacant buildings. Housing for the people.
In Dublin, the housing crisis was impossible to ignore. Like in many cities, people were living on the streets or struggling to rent or buy homes. Even middle-class people who had never had to worry about housing before were starting to realize something isn't right here. And in the middle of it all, two men are evicted from a building that says Homes for All. I was one of those people who stopped, and seeing those words made me curious. Who are these people, and what are they doing here? What happens when our housing and legal systems can't provide for our needs? Who are the people who go outside the law to house people, and what are their stories?
It's 9:30 a.m. here now in the Aonad Sean Houston, a building which has been acquisitioned by the Revolutionary Workers' Union Council to provide shelter and support for those in need.
I had found a team of other filmmakers interested in documenting the RHL's work, and we reached out to their social media to arrange a meeting. An organizer got back to us soon and was happy to have a meeting inside one of the occupied buildings. In for a penny, in for a punt. We set a date for the meeting, and when the day came, I met them outside the shelter. This wasn't Connolly House, but another building the RHL had occupied, known as Park Gate House. The RHL had renamed it Aonad Sean Houston, which is Irish Gaelic for the Sean Houston Centre, in honor of another martyr for Irish independence. Aonad Houston was on the west side of the city, and it looked a bit like a medieval fortress, with turrets and a stone wall surrounding a courtyard with a large gate. Banners hung over the building, reading "Emergency Shelter Here" and "Pregnant Homeless Matter." Just like at Connolly House, the Starry Plough was flying above the building, the symbol of Irish Republican socialism. I later learned that the building was once a warehouse for a home goods store called Home Focus. At the time I was visiting, the building was planned to be demolished and replaced with an apartment tower, but had sat vacant for some time. As I approached the building, I noticed several pages of eviction notices zip-tied to the front gate, demanding that the activists leave the property. Walking up to the gate, I didn't quite know what to expect. I have a lot of respect for anyone who works to house homeless people, but at the same time, I had never been involved with this kind of radical activism before, and I had heard people make disparaging comments about what an unofficial homeless shelter was probably like, suggesting that they were dens of drugs and violence. But I found the gate my contact told me about, which was being guarded by a few men in sunglasses and COVID masks. I told them about my meeting with the organizer, and they escorted me through a door into the building. The first thing I noticed on the inside were the murals. Painted 10 feet high in red, black, and white, They depicted revolutionary figures like James Connolly, Bobby Sands, and Che Guevara. It was a huge warehouse space with sunlight pouring in through skylights in the ceiling. Plastic tape divided the space into sections for tents, tables, and common areas, and there were people bustling around, cooking and painting. But for some reason, the murals struck me more than anything. Why put up murals in a makeshift shelter that you're likely going to be evicted from in a matter of months or less?
We got artwork done to actually create the atmosphere inside. We had homeless people who actually came out and participated. The effect that that had on people taking charge of some part of their own lives again. Just unbelievable.
I also sat down with a spokesman for the RHL, Sean Doyle, to talk about the work they were doing across Dublin. Sean was very clear that the RHL and its parent organisation, the Revolutionary Workers' Union, were run by a council of people and had no single leader.
We now leaflet in advance in given areas, talk to people, say who we are, what we're trying to do, and then acquisition. We would pick a building in a heavily populated area where we would actually highlight it, use banners, issue statements, set up stalls outside it, make it a complete public area, public event. We want to put it front of stage, front of house, that this is no longer acceptable, won't be tolerated.
I got to talk to some of the residents of Ian and Houston and hear their stories. I was very careful about who I recorded in the shelter. Aside from the usual ethics of recording people, everyone there could possibly be arrested for trespass on private property. I got signed permission from everyone you see and hear in these videos.
My name is Sabrina and I'm living here 2.5 weeks. I came from a traveller community, so I became homeless at the age of 17. I did have a house, but unfortunately I was put in a complex where there was drug users, and I was bringing me 8-year-old to school one day, but he was only 4 at this time, and he opened the lift and there was a drug user dead in the lift. So I actually left, but because I wasn't there for 6 months and I surrendered that home, they blacklisted me for 2 years. I've still been homeless since then. That was nearly 6 years ago. And then I had to volunteer to give me mum my kids. I see my kids every single day, and if it wasn't for my kids and my family, I think I'd be dead at this rate.
Hi, my name's Claire Lyons. I've been living at Sean Houston for almost 3 weeks. In 2018, I was in a horrible situation where I was out on a night out. There was a very dangerous person there I ran into on the night out he unfortunately, him and his 3 pals lured a young woman back to his apartment, which is actually across the road from here. And at the time I was in a very bad place myself. I had a lot of sexual violence experiences, and so I was self-medicating at the time. So when this happened, I literally had a bit of a meltdown on the side of the road, and a police officer was walking past and I stopped them to try and get help for the young woman I was incredibly concerned about, because I knew 3 men told me what they were going to do to her. And because I was in possession of illegal substances myself, I was arrested. I'd still, I stand over what I did, but unfortunately on the back of that I have a 1-year suspended prison sentence. That's literally taken me out of my profession. I used to be an environmental youth worker, so I can't really do that work anymore because of, my conviction that I've got with the court system, so.
Many of the residents I met weren't comfortable being interviewed, but the stories they told me about themselves were many and varied. They were fleeing political and economic struggle, domestic violence, and addiction. Many of the residents had been in Dublin's system of homeless hostels, or sleeping rough on the street. After what the residents had been through, you'd expect them to be tired and angry, and many of them weren't. I saw the organizers break up shouting matches. Many of the residents had been addicted to drugs or alcohol. But the RHL took pains to create a safe shelter for everyone.
Yeah, signing anew. There's no alcohol allowed. There's no drugs being permitted onto the premises. The rules are that we treat each other with respect. They took in all cultures. There's no bullying. There's no racists. Like, we all sit down as a family and we all get along.
He's in an awful lot of films as well, Clinch, Stephen Clinch.
He learned acting in Mountjoy.
Yeah, Mountjoy Prison, yeah.
I grew up with him.
He lives at the back of my nanny. My nanny lives in
Millbrook.
Millbrook. My nanny lives there.
What's your nanny's name?
Most people's time in the shelter was spent resting and recuperating. Being unhoused can greatly increase the risk of many types of illness, but there was a surprising sense of energy in the place. There were often organizers coming and going, dropping off supplies. Once, someone brought a bunch of tents salvaged from a nearby music festival that would have been trash otherwise. The only mess in the place was debris from the years the building had sat vacant, and the strongest smells were of cooking food and wet paint. The atmosphere was less like a desperate squat and more like an activist co-op.
When we went into some of the buildings, they just heat hits you in the face. And you say, my God, there's heating here, there's hot water, there's showers, and people are filthy, dirty, dying on the streets.
There's a fridge, there's even a toaster, so we make a bit of an Irish thing as a nation. We're very obsessed with sandwiches and toasting sandwiches and sandwich toasters.
We get support of the homeless outreaches, of like the soup runs, the soup kitchens.
Food supplies arrived, and there was one woman there and she was stacking everything in methodical order, and there's someone cleaning, and what can I do? Contrary to what people think, everybody there wanted to play a role, wanted to play a part.
If there's problems in here, like we actually can go to one of the team leaders themselves, and they'd bring up in meetings and all.
On September 24th, 2022, thousands of protesters flooded the streets of Dublin.
Men, women, and children of all ages marched on the Dáil, one of the Irish Houses of Parliament, to demand action on the housing crisis. Political parties, trade unions, community organizations, radical groups, and nearly everyone you could think of was represented. They chanted slogans like "Homes for people, not for profit," and "Rents are rising, so are we." They carried banners that wouldn't look out of place on one of the RHL's shelters. The crowd processed toward a stage where big names like Mary Lou McDonald, the president of the Irish political party Sinn Féin, promised change if the people kept pressure on their government and voted in leaders more willing to address the crisis.
We say that every worker, every family, every young person, every older person deserves a good and secure life. We need a government of the people, a government for real change. Well, if the government didn't hear you before today, let me tell you something, folks, they'll hear you now.
But the RHL itself wasn't at the march. Leadership of the RHL had decided to hold a separate protest. According to their revolutionary politics, they believed that the Irish government was fundamentally corrupt and complicit in the deadly housing crisis.
And so they believed that engaging with that system, even to protest it, could never bring about change.
They were committed to working entirely outside the system. Instead, they believed in waking up fellow working-class people to action, and so they held a smaller march through a historic working-class neighborhood of Dublin.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now, we find that if we march up and down the street with 100 or thousands of people on a Saturday with government buildings closed and everyone goes home again, nothing gets done.
Basically, we're marching for the cost of living and the homeless crisis.
Because they're trying to evict us, but we're going to keep on fighting, and the more marches and the more people we get us, the better.
Yeah.
Up Sean Houston!
And then we went out to demonstrate. People were going by and blowing horns at them to see the elation on their face, that they were clawing some of their dignity back, some of their self-respect back. You see, sometimes people can get so downtrodden for so long, they actually think they're feeling normal until they get a small stimulant and say, Jesus, I'm alive. Connolly referred to it, he called it, be aware of the awakening of the slave. And I say, Jesus, you know, even with the damages being done, if people could participate in doing something for themselves, I can actually see a healing developing. You know what I mean? I'd like to see the so-called government acquisition empty homes. But I know they won't. They will not touch anything that's going to affect the market. And I don't think we can justify it in years to come to say to somebody else that we worked within the confines.
As the RHL's march proceeded, I didn't know where we were headed until we stopped in front of a corporate office, and a spokesman told the crowd that these were the offices of Blackwater Assets Management, a security company that had assisted with evicting some of the RHL's shelters. And then something happened that I didn't expect.
Right, Akarja, we're here outside the offices of Blackwater Assets Management, who are part of the eviction industry coming against the homeless people. These people like to see themselves as the hired thugs of capital, and we're here to send them a very clear message. Anybody who comes against the homeless is going to be met by us and resisted. We will take the fight to them if they take the fight to us. Because there's only one solution to this crisis, and that's the revolution. Here, Akarja, Shinai.
The RHL spokespeople threw containers of black paint at the windows of the building.
Fuck Blackwater! Blackwater!
A few RHL members sung rebel songs before the crowd moved on and finished their protest.
Let's rise up and take our country. Let's rise up and take our land.
We do not want to preside and say to children in years to come about this period of our lives, what could we do? Because there's so much wrong, so much wrong in this state that we can't perceive anything less than a revolution. It cannot be reformed.